Bright Lights, Big City was my first novel, and honestly, my expectations, my ambitions were that I might get a few good reviews and parlay it into a teaching job. You know, I didn't have very big hopes for that book, simply because I'd worked in publishing a little bit. I'd worked for Random House as a reader of manuscripts for a year and a half or so, and I had seen that most first novels come and go and barely leave a trace, and in fact, Jason Epstein, the vice president of Random House at that time, took me out to lunch and he said, "Look, you've written a great novel. We're very proud of it," but he said, "Don't expect much. Your generation doesn't read. The novel's dead. Nobody cares about New York." I mean, that was fortunately, he turned out to be wrong on all counts. And I think Bright Lights sort of in its own way refuted those arguments. I certainly couldn't have ever imagined the kind of success that book enjoyed, and in fact, I certainly didn't think of myself as having written some sort of zeitgeist novel or generational statement. I mean, I wrote this autobiographical novel modeled on some of the great Bildungsroman that I admired in my youth, and it snowballed, and it was ultimately it was pretty overwhelming. At the same time, it was exciting. On the one hand, I thought, how could this be happening? And on the other hand, I'd sort of been, like all kids, I would sort of practice my acceptance speech for the Pulitzer Prize in front of the of the mirror, and part of you sort of feels like, oh yes, they're finally recognizing my genius. It was, my agent took me out to lunch about a month into the whole process, and she said, I've never seen anything quite like this. And I think you should be prepared for the fact that the words "Bright Lights, Big City" are going to be in the first line of your obituary, and that's probably true. But on the one hand, it gave me a lot to live down, and there were a lot of people who, ultimately were kind of put off by the scale of the success of Bright Lights, Big City, and I think, there was a way in which I had to sort of pay for that success. I think some of my subsequent books were slightly undervalued as a result. But on the other hand, it gave me a readership and a career, and all I had ever really wanted to do with my life was to be a novelist. And fortunately, that's what I have been ever since.